Well, there is much to discuss. Let's bring in our panel. Joining us from California is Abbas Milani. He is the director of the Iranian Studies program at Stanford University and a research fellow at the Hoover Institution. Here in the studio, Reza Marashi. He's the research director of the National Iranian American Council in Washington, D.C. From Denver, Zhao is a professor and director of the Center for China-U.S. Cooperation at the University of Denver. And Merrill Matthews is a resident scholar at the Institute for Policy Innovation in Dallas. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Abbas Milani, let me start with you. We have the announcement. It was not totally unexpected. Probably one of the worst kept secrets in Washington for a few days, but it's now official. The United States is pulling out of the deal. What do you make of it?
Well, I think it's very difficult to make good sense out of it. Everyone, from IAEA to UN to European allies to many in the U.S. administration, including Jim Mattis, including the past Secretary of State, have indicated that this might be a flawed deal, but it is essentially a good deal, and it is doing what it was supposed to do. To unilaterally withdraw from it, I can't imagine having any positive impact, except that I think it's a bonanza to the most conservative elements in Iran, who have all along said negotiating with the U.S. is futile, and who are also facing a grave economic challenge at home. And this will give them someone to blame, and it will give them an excuse for their own incompetence and mismanagement.
Merrill, here we have the United States under President Trump violating a major international multilateral agreement and reimposing sanctions on Iran. Is this not going to affect how the U.S. is seen around the world, its credibility, its trustworthiness?
It may be, but of course they never actually ratified that. They never actually ratified the agreement in the Senate, and so as a result, the president can do this, and that was one of the criticisms at the time. If Barack Obama wanted to make international treaties, he needed to be able to run it through the Senate as the Constitution requires. He did not do that because he didn't have the support, and as a result, President Trump is free to leave this agreement, and I think he did the right thing.
But at the time, Merrill, was President Obama within his rights to go into this deal and sign it on behalf of the United States, to go into agreement with the other parties?
Oh, I think absolutely not. This is a treaty, and under our Constitution, a treaty has to be ratified by the Senate. President Obama did not have the support for that, so he decided to do it anyway. And so it was always hanging by a thread. If Hillary Clinton had been elected, she would have continued with the deal, but President Trump decided not to, and he has the right to do that under the fact that it was never ratified.
What do you make of that, Reza?
I think that's less than honest, shall we say. You know, Barack Obama was forced by Republicans and Democrats to take this deal to the Senate, and the Senate voted, and the vote was close, but it was approved. So Congress had its chance to review the agreement. They actually put a variety of provisions into the agreement through congressional legislation, not the actual agreement itself, to make sure, like, for example, the president had to certify every 90 days that Iran was in compliance, which caused a big to-do in Washington, D.C. over the first year or so of Donald Trump's presidency. So it's not the matter of whether or not it's a treaty. George W. Bush did a variety of executive authority actions that could have been taken to Congress, but the reality of the situation is Congress doesn't get much of anything done in Washington nowadays, and that's a bipartisan criticism. So no, I think that criticism of treaty versus executive authority action is less than honest.
Okay, let's bring in Zhao. He's in Denver. Sam, as I said, this was a multilateral agreement. China was part of the agreement. It was one of the signatories. How will President Trump's action be seen in Beijing?
I think it will be seen as another act of the U.S. president, irresponsible and also not be trusted for what U.S. said or U.S. have promised. In fact, going back to the earlier question, that President Trump has the right to provoke the agreement, but it's not right to do the things because that will put U.S. credibility among international community in a very bad position. In fact, what Trump has been doing is that not only America first, but Trump first. Anything his predecessors promised or did should be reversed. Anything that violates his personal beliefs or what he perceived American interest should be reversed. So this is not U.S. as a great power or the leading superpower should be doing. In fact, they will send very, very bad messages around the globe. No countries will trust the U.S. In fact, in the Chinese mind, also, he's launching a trade war with China, but he is provoking all the agreements. He would weaken his own positions in dealing with China. In fact, also on the North Korean front, as someone mentioned earlier, this would also send a very wrong message because it would let North Korea know that he would double standard on the U.S. relationships with Iran and North Korea, because North Korea has never promised, although they are talking about giving up their nuclear weapons. Trump is already agreed to meet with Kim Jong-un, with the North Korean leader. Right. And so for North Korean, this is something they can go from there, don't care. They really don't care. Here for North Korea, I think two messages. One is that any agreements signed, North Korea could provoke, U.S. could provoke, does not mean anything. Second, he might want to have a higher standard for North Korea, but that does not come to the mind of Kim Jong-un. He will not buy into that. So for the U.S., this is a loser situation.
Abbas Milani, there has been some response from former President Barack Obama. Of course, he was president when this deal was signed. He has called it a serious mistake. In his statement that President Trump made today, he said that Iran was still enriching uranium up to what he called nuclear breakout. Iran, he said, had received billions of dollars, some of it in cash. And he also said that the so-called sunset provisions that have been put into this agreement will lead to a nuclear arms race in the region. Is any of that true?
What Obama said, or what?
No, what Trump said. Yeah, what Trump said.
Well, I don't think so. I think much of what he said about the agreement, I think both in terms of the substance of the agreement and both in terms of what his future would hold, are his readings. They're not the readings of anyone who has actually read the agreement and anyone who has actually enforced it. The IAEA doesn't believe that. European Union representatives don't believe that. As I said, there are clearly some flaws in the deal, but negotiation, when the Obama administration entered into these negotiations, Iran had 19,000 centrifuges that were churning. Iran had Iraq, heavy water. Iran had enormous developments in terms of enrichment, in terms of the capacity to use the test missiles. And this was a very serious rollback of that program. And I think Mr. Trump, for some reason that I don't understand, has never accepted that this was a major rollback, but it's not a complete roll-up of the Iranian nuclear program. Khamenei, who has spent an enormous amount of the country's wealth and capital over the last 30 years in the pursuit of this dream, of his dream of enriching uranium, of having a nuclear program, couldn't suddenly shut it all down, although they came very, very close to shutting it down. The rhetoric of Mr. Trump in criticizing this is ironically almost exactly like the rhetoric of some of the most conservative critics of Rouhani and Zarif, who signed this agreement. In Iran, too, the conservatives, or the radicals, depending on what you want to call them, have called this the worst deal in Iran's history.
Okay. Reza, let's listen. Let's listen to... Go ahead, Sam. Yeah.
On the issue of arms race, there is a possibility of arms race in the nuclear front. But in the meantime, we know that European countries are not in agreement with the U.S. And China also, I don't think, is in agreement with the U.S. So these countries may continue the negotiation with Iran. So U.S. will be isolated. So if these countries could work together and reach an agreement, that would avoid the arms race, and the U.S. would not be part of that. That's a really ironical result. Just like in Asia-Pacific, U.S. withdraw from the TPP. Now Japan and other 10 countries work together and sign agreement without U.S. So U.S. will be out of all the major international connective actions. That's really bad for the U.S.
Reza, let's listen to part of what President Trump had to say today. Let's watch.
The deal lifted crippling economic sanctions on Iran in exchange for very weak limits on the regime's nuclear activity and no limits at all on its other malign behavior, including its sinister activities in Syria, Yemen, and other places all around the world. In other words, at the point when the United States had maximum leverage, this disastrous deal gave this regime, and it's a regime of great terror, many billions of dollars, some of it in actual cash. A great embarrassment to me as a citizen and to all citizens of the United States.
Reza, what do you make of that?
Well, again, I think the President of the United States is being less than honest and playing with the facts. You know, let's just unpack a few things that he said. One, giving Iran billions of dollars. It was its own money. Iran allocated the vast majority of that money toward paying down debts, making sure that liquidity went into banks, making sure hard cash went into banks, making sure that construction projects and infrastructure projects that had bad debts were paid off. The argument that that money went to Syria and other places, there's no demonstrable proof that that's the case. You know, the prisoner swap that took place, where they said Iran got millions of dollars, billions of dollars, that completely ignores the details that was Iran's own money that the Shah had paid to the United States for weapons deals. And then they didn't get the weapons, so now they got the money back with interest. And the U.S. was about to lose that case in an adjudication at The Hague. So if you really strip it down to its very essence, the details are not relevant to somebody like Donald Trump, who hasn't read the agreement, doesn't know the details of the agreement. He just doesn't want to continue going down the path of what he describes as Obama's deal. He just wants to not be Barack Obama.
Well, let me weigh in on that. You're missing the key point here, which is Donald Trump is telling you what bothers him most. Iran has continued to be the leading state sponsor of terror and destabilizing a number of areas. It has continued with its ballistic missiles, and of course there was $1.7 billion handed over to Iran in cash in unmarked planes that we didn't find out about until we were able to find out about that. And so it really is, he's telling you what bothers him most about that. Most people agree that Iran is complying with the agreement. It's that Donald Trump feels it's a really bad agreement and he wants to get out of it.
Well, let's unpack that.
Yeah. Sorry, Merrill, I just want to ask you about this. I mean, you talk about the ballistic missiles that Iran has been developing. You talk about its activities in the region, etc. Those were not part of this deal.
No, they weren't. And he feels like that was a huge missed opportunity. That's what he says in the speech. We had maximum leverage. We could have tried to push that. They said they wouldn't do it. And so that was not part of the deal. And he feels like that was a major oversight.
But the other thing, Merrill, he said that Iran continues to enrich uranium. Well, we talked about the billions of dollars that Iran received, that the inspection regime is not intrusive enough, where we've heard that it's one of the most intrusive inspection regimes in arms control ever. You know, and that's not what we heard from the inspectors as well. I mean, is the president getting bad intelligence here? He cited Israel's intelligence and not his own intelligence.
One of the side agreements that they denied that there was a side agreement, what we found out about was that Iran said, we're not going to let you own our military facility. We will take the soil samples and send them in. Even if you want to say that's okay, it sounds awfully fishy to a lot of people.
All right, Reza, go ahead.
Look, at the end of the day, if you have a problem with ballistic missiles, if you have a problem with Iranian sponsorship of terrorism, you have a problem with any Iranian behavior, whether it be inside the nuclear agreement or outside the nuclear agreement, nobody with a straight face can say that anything Donald Trump said today was anything more than an airing of grievances. There is no plan to address these issues. There is no strategy. The team in place that he has to address this, they gave you greatest hits like the Iraq War. So you can't sit here and say, we have all these problems and they weren't part of the deal, and that's why he should withdraw from the deal. He's taken something that was in the finished basket, the solved basket, the completed basket on his desk, and he's created a crisis of his own choosing. He's made a crisis that was previously resolved. At the end of the day, there's very few people that agree with the president on this, and he surrounded himself with an echo chamber of people that have ideological grievances. This is not going to go in any kind of positive direction, and he's really out on a limb here by himself.
Sam?
Can I add something to this?
Yeah, go ahead.
You know, I fully find the decision by the Trump administration to leave this a disastrous agreement decision. But I think part of the responsibility must also be placed on the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime, when Obama was in power, had the possibility of consolidating this deal, but Khamenei, in his intransigence, the conservatives in their rhetorical anti-Americanism simply didn't allow it. When you have the IRGC put a missile and write in Hebrew that this is an Israeli destroying missile and test it, even if you consider this to be within your full sovereign rights, this is a foolish act. And that's the kind of action that has lent some context to this very wrong decision.
I hear what you're saying, Abbas. I hear what you're saying, Abbas. But even that was not part of this deal.
No, it wasn't. There is question on whether there was any discussion. There is some ambiguity about whether there was ever discussion on missile testing or not. But even if there wasn't any question, if there was absolutely no limit on Iran's right to test missiles, to put a missile and put in Hebrew that this is for the destruction of Israel is not good politics, is not good optics, and it absolutely begets the kind of response that Netanyahu gave last week, and it begets the kind of helps beget the kind of response. Trump was already against this deal.
Okay, very quickly, Reza, your response to that.
The Israelis write the same thing on their missiles. So 2 wrongs don't make a right. That's 1. And 2, I would say at the end of the day, I think there was a missed opportunity on the part of Iran, the United States, and all the other actors to try and move things into a better place. But to place responsibility on Iran in any way, shape, or form in this specific instance when it hasn't done anything Iran and it's been verified 11 times to be in compliance, I think mixes together 2 things that shouldn't really be mixed together. You had a problem with stuff Iran does outside of the nuclear agreement. There are plenty of opportunities to address it without torpedoing the agreement. So let's not mix apples and oranges.
Sam, I want to look a bit more at the international impact of the announcement we heard today. Do you think this will change the nature of the relationship between Iran and China right now? We know that China imports a lot of Iranian oil, but will that relationship change?
Yeah, we will only bring Iran closer to China because these 2 countries have been working together for a long time. This agreement would put some constraints on China and Iran relationship. Without this agreement, these countries could freely communicate and exchange and having economic relations. In fact, Iran is already part of the China's so-called One Belt, One Road country, and there are a lot of economic exchanges between these 2 countries. So this would only enhance the hands of China and also Iran. On a different angle on this subject, when Trump said the U.S. has a maximum leverage, I don't think that's the case. U.S. has no that kind of maximum leverage. U.S. leverage has been decreased in relationships with many, many countries, including Iran and also China and also North Korea. Looking at the North Korean case, for example, North Korea has not really met any promises to Trump. Trump already agreed to meet with Kim Jong-un. And when Trump tried to threaten North Korea met some very strong response and during the weekend said North Korea will not negotiate with U.S. from weaker position. And North Korea agrees to negotiate with the U.S. Was not because of U.S. pressure, was their own goodwill and their own interests. And also they realigned with China. And North Korea is now in a much, much stronger position to negotiate with Trump. In fact, today we can see Pompeo, the Secretary of State, cannot confirm what Trump said. If the location and the time has been said, he is still in the process of a negotiation. So we really don't know what the U.S. can accomplish from what he said, maximum leverage position.
Merrill, does this now make the negotiations with the DPRK, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, even more difficult? Because they might turn around and say, look, you know, why should we believe what you're saying if you're going to tear up the agreement immediately it's signed?
I think they will make them more interesting, but I don't know necessarily more difficult. And I'd also weigh in here to say China has an interest in the U.S. making nice with North Korea. Part of that negotiation discussion may be the U.S. suggesting to China, don't increase your imports of Iranian oil. In fact, the U.S. would like to increase our exports of oil to China, and we'll make sure that that happens if you don't go to Iran. So there's a lot of moving pieces here, and I don't think anybody really knows what's going to happen yet. But we have a very unconventional president, and sometimes he pulls out some good things.
Reza,
what American has been criticized North Korea as a liar. Now, North Korea could also accuse the U.S. as a liar. North Korea will not do whatever they promise. In fact, during the previous negotiations, North Korea always broken their promises. Now they have a good example to follow.
Reza, the president said in his announcement that he now has what he called definitive proof that the Iranian promises were a lie. He cited a presentation which was made by the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last week. Let's watch that.
At the heart of the Iran deal was a giant fiction that a murderous regime desired only a peaceful nuclear energy program. Today, we have definitive proof that this Iranian promise was a lie. Last week, Israel published intelligence documents long concealed by Iran, conclusively showing the Iranian regime and its history of pursuing nuclear weapons. The fact is, this was a horrible, one-sided deal that should have never, ever been made.
Two things here, Reza. He cited Israeli intelligence, not his own intelligence. And we heard from the Secretary of State as well as the Director of National Intelligence in the United States saying that Iran was in complete compliance with this agreement. That's the one thing. The other thing is, to what extent was what he said today driven by what Israel wanted?
It's a great question. I mean, I think working backwards, starting with your second question, I mean, there are a variety of foreign policy analysts, former government officials like myself, who are deeply concerned that this president is putting the interests of Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates ahead of American interests. We have a hard time seeing how the path that he is pursuing is firmly in the interest of the United States because he doesn't detail anything that he's trying to achieve. It's an airing of grievances. It's like he's reading the American grievances vis-a-vis Iran off of a Wikipedia page. There's no substance to it, right? Then moving further along, it's extremely troubling and frankly extremely telling that you would ignore the Director of National Intelligence and other senior administration officials, career government officials even, who don't transfer in and out of power depending on whether Democrats or Republicans occupy the White House, and instead just allying with a hostile foreign power who for over 25 years has been trying to get the United States to bomb Iran. It's deeply troubling on multiple levels, and nobody's pressing the president to flesh this kind of stuff out.
Right. Abbas Milani, I've only got 30 seconds. Given what we heard today, can this agreement survive?
I think the agreement can survive. I think the Europeans are clearly keen on keeping it. The Chinese are, the Russians are, UN is, IAEA is, and I think Iran has just announced that they're going to try to make a best case effort to see whether they can get the benefits they want from it and preserve it.
That's where we're going to have to leave it. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being here.